If you thought things couldn't sound any worse for Aston Martin and Honda at the start of 2026, think again. Their main engine problem is so bad, the drivers are worried it will injure them. Honda's engine was suffering from such excessive vibration in pre-season testing that it was shaking the battery to the point of failure, hence such miserable unreliability across 2 weeks in Bahrain. There's another consequence too. The vibration's so bad that it's being transmitted through the chassis to the drivers, and according to managing technical partner and team principal Adrian Newey, they fear suffering permanent nerve damage if they do too many consecutive laps. The remarkable revelation came on the eve of the opening weekend in Australia, when Newey and Honda Racing Corporation president Koji Watanabe conducted media duties together on Thursday in Melbourne. Honda still hasn't worked out the root cause of the vibrations it noted in testing, which means they cannot yet be stopped completely. A small silver lining is Honda does seem to have found a way to protect the battery slightly better. Newey said this was the focus of the work between testing and Australia because it was the critical item on life. So what's been achieved on the dyno and will be used in Melbourne has significantly reduced the vibration going into the battery, although the key words there are on the dyno. As Watanabe admitted, its effectiveness cannot yet be fully guaranteed in the real track condition, so Friday practice will be the first test. But even if Honda's short-term countermeasures are successful enough that the battery can survive running for longer, that's not the only problem. The cause is possibly a combination of the engine and MG UK, and the chassis is the receiver of the vibrations. Because it's a stiff structure with very little damping, the transmission is problematic and something Newey says we haven't made any progress on. And that's had more consequences beyond just making the engine brake. One problem for Aston Martin is general reliability in terms of mirrors and tail lights literally being shaken off the car. The other is the shocking Newey reveal that as the vibration ultimately ends up being transmitted into the drivers through the steering wheel, Fernando Alonso feels he cannot do more than 25 laps consecutively without risking permanent nerve damage to his hands. Meanwhile, Lance Stroll, who's had wrist injuries to fix in recent years, thinks he can't do more than 15 laps. The drivers are at pains to point out, no pun intended, that it's not causing a safety issue for them at the moment behind the wheel, but it's definitely uncomfortable. Alonso says they feel the frequency of the vibrations in their bodies after 20 or 25 minutes of driving, and it leaves his hands and feet feeling a little numb. Stroll went even further, suggesting it was like electrocuting yourself in a chair, which we can only assume meant the strange frequency is like having an electric shock rather than anything more permanent. The upshot is that Aston Martin's laps will be heavily restricted this weekend one way or another, at least according to Newey. This probably explains the speculation that emerged about the team planning to take the start and do the bare minimum before retiring the cars. Aston Martin was and remains adamant that it is not the case that it plans a premeditated start and park in Melbourne. It desperately needs mileage, so it has to try and run as much as possible. But the reality is that the cars will probably not finish, as a maximum number of laps will have to be enforced just to be careful until they can get on top of the source of the vibrations. That leaves Honda on the brink of an embarrassing start to life as Aston Martin's works partner that will undo all its progress to becoming a title-winning manufacturer with Red Bull and put it back 10 years or so to the depths of its McLaren woes. It's somehow looking even worse than it seemed after testing. And if you want the inside line on the Aston Martin-Honda story, make sure you join the Race Members Club and make us your 2026 F1 Paddock Pass. Charting Aston Martin and Honda progress will be a key part of the behind-the-scenes exclusive insight we'll bring to the Members Club early in the season, and you can get 90% off your first month by checking out the link in the description. Reliability is one thing, performance is another, and that doesn't seem too great for Aston Martin and Honda either. Honda hasn't wanted to comment on what performance deficit it's carrying with its engine on the grounds that its pre-season program was so compromised it never ran the engine at maximum RPM, so it simply doesn't know. It will have an idea though, and while all the talk has been about its battery problems and a claim that its MG UK was running underpowered in testing, Newey's dropped a hint that the real limitation on Honda's side in terms of performance will lie in the internal combustion engine. This tallies with some pre-season remarks made by senior Honda staff about not being able to replicate what it did so well with the ignition timing and rapid combustion in its V6 engine under the previous rules. Honda claimed in pre-season the V6 would be the bigger differentiator between manufacturers this year, despite the MG UK being increased to account for almost 50% of total engine power output. Newey's comments on Thursday support that, even though he claimed there was no point in speculating on the extent of the deficit now because it will be revealed on track very soon. What he said was revealing enough though. He specified that a problem with these rules is that if internal combustion engine power is down, then more electrical energy has to be spent to compensate the V6 with the MGUK, so then the battery runs flat when you still need it. Newey said this becomes a self-fulfilling downward spiral, and the simple thing we'd say to that is why would he make such a specific observation if not because Honda's carrying the kind of V6 deficit he's talking about there. Newey never says things by accident after all. He did make a point of stressing his absolute belief in Honda's ability to improve whatever its deficit is, something Alonso also mentioned in his own media session. But in another implication that Honda's performance limitation is significant enough that all the problems can't be sorted this year, Alonso said the time that's required for it to have a top engine again probably doesn't match what time he's got left as an F1 driver. Honda will prioritise changing reliability related parts where possible within the cost cap once it has a proper solution in mind, and whether a major performance update comes later in the season isn't part of the current discussion. Even if it maps that plan out soon, a maximum of 2 engine upgrades will be allowed this year anyway. Alonso turns 45 this year and inevitably is already getting questions about whether the current struggles will impact his decision on his future. His answer at the moment is he doesn't know how long Honda's recovery will take, but hopefully some short-term improvements will help inform what he does for 2027. And to give more insight on the vibe at Aston Martin on an intriguing, if sometimes slightly awkward first day in the paddock, here's John Noble from Melbourne.
So behind me in the paddock today was one of the most remarkable press conferences I've seen for a very long time. And this is after some remarkable press conferences from pre-season testing. Remember Max Verstappen destroying the 2026 rules, McLaren calling for safety changes. Well, today Adrian Newey's press conference, his first press conference as team principal, was out of the ordinary. It was absolutely rammed to the rafters, a table in a slightly oddly shaped across the room, which meant everyone was pushed to one side. Very intense to hear what was happening, and it turned out in a way that nobody could predict. There were microphone problems, the wired mics kept stopping, kept starting. You could hear Adrian Newey getting frustrated, he's trying to explain things. The same for Watanabe from Honda as well. They would talk for a bit, it would cut out, and you could sense the frustration. There was one point where Adrian, under his breath, as the microphone went silent, said we can't get the PA system to work either. So there's very much a sense of it being quite awkward. Adrian, made it very clear where the problems of the current Aston Martin-Honda package are. It revolves around the Honda power unit. He gave this remarkable explanation about why they can't do lots of laps. It's because the vibrations in the car is being felt through the steering wheel. He said Fernando Alonso can barely do 25 laps. Lance Stroll, only a few more than 10, maybe 10, 11 laps he could do. It offered a new insight into things. And Newey was quite clear that actually he thinks the chassis is quite good. He thinks it's the 5th best car at the moment. He says there's improvements coming through, rapid progress being worked on the Silverstone factory. Until they sort out the Honda reliability, this isn't going to move forwards as much as he wants it to be. And there was just this kind of the sense of laying everything out in the open. Adrian Newey was very clear about where he felt things were going. He also mentioned to Watanabe-san, saying that we didn't discuss this beforehand, it had been very hastily arranged. And it left everyone afterwards just with this sense of an amazing press conference, very unpredictable, and I think it points to some troubled few weeks to go, and maybe some troubled few months.
The AMR26 itself didn't look pleasant to drive during testing and ended pre-season 4 seconds off the pace. Aston Martin has its own problems beyond Honda, given the car is believed to be overweight and by Newey's own estimation is maybe the 5th best chassis right now, with a gap of around 3/4 of a second to a second to the benchmark. So where's the other 3 seconds from testing? Some of that will obviously be in the car running compromised in various ways. Saying the car is a Q3 contender itself though means the blame goes squarely on Honda for being anything less than that. Newey says Aston Martin's own issues are a result of not getting a model in the wind tunnel until mid-April last year after he had joined. He implied that Aston Martin is also still early in the development of its actual aerodynamic concept because it devoted more time last year to finalising a good, sound architectural package for the car with parts that cannot be easily changed in season. Newey believes that's been achieved and reckons the car has huge, tremendous development potential in it, with quite an aggressive development plan underway that could make it a top car this season, at least on the chassis side. It's no surprise that Newey backs his own creation, but it's bold talk, and whether by accident or design, being quite so brazen risks hanging Honda out to dry. Aston Martin is vying with new entrant Cadillac to avoid being F1's slowest team at the start of the season, and Newey's made it clear the responsibility for that lies solely on one side and that his side should get even stronger very soon. Even speaking about sides is slightly odd though. It's good that Aston Martin and Honda wanted to put on a united front in their first technical briefing of the season by having Newey and Watanabe speaking together. But despite insisting they're working very closely and very well, this partnership isn't yet coming across as, well, a particularly great partnership. When Red Bull and Honda worked best together, it was almost impossible to get them to separate the car from the engine. The overall vibe of Aston Martin so far is actually a little reminiscent of Honda's problems with McLaren a decade ago, when that team insisted its car was one of the very best. Even though Honda's poor performance and reliability were a letdown, it would later turn out that McLaren had also vastly overestimated the quality of its own design work. Aston Martin might not be on a course to doing exactly the same thing, and right now Honda is definitely the limiting factor, but some of the talk feels worryingly familiar.